Welcome back to the podcast. Today we have an incredibly special guest on today. We have Brian Dickinson, Navy rescue swimmer, best-selling author, did the incredible feat of climbing Mount Everest, and he's a podcast host with his own podcast. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a treat, man. I'm excited. I ran into you on Instagram, was checking stuff out, and I was like, wow, Everest is I saw that you climbed Everest. I was like, that's insane that I dove in. And it's just like, you don't see that very often. I mean, there's only like one other vet that I know that's climbed Everest. So when I came across it, I was like, dude, that's insane. That's an incredible story. Like no matter how you spin it, you know, you always hear about buds, you hear about whatever special operations, but it's like you climbed Everest. Like that's just, I don't know, but to me, that's just on a whole nother level. So, but we can start off, man, like how, you know, what got you in the Navy rescue swimmer? Because rescue swimmers, that's no joke. I know that's an insane kind of pipeline, and that's an incredibly taxing career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's definitely tough. Some of the, people don't do well in oxygen deprived areas, underwater. So the attrition rate is really high. But yeah, what got me into it, I grew up in the 80s, not any technology back then, no social media, anything else. So, coming from a military family, a lot of Navy military family. I don't know, I just wasn't ready to go straight into college, even though I had opportunities, because I played sports, I had a scholarship for soccer and art. So kind of a contrast of things, but I wanted to go see the world and just, do, I don't know. I didn't realize, just at the time, just kind of, searching for those traumatic, instances in life where, you have a traumatic childhood to a certain extent, and then you end up getting into like a special operations and, just kind of chasing this trauma, and then eventually led me to Everest. So it took 50 years of my life to kind of look back on it all and kind of understand my own path, but it was kind of planned out for me, without even knowing. So wanted to go in the Navy, but not do just a normal job. Wanted to actually seeing Top Gun, that's like the the main thing in the 80s of just getting everyone stoked to go in the military, specifically the Navy. But I saw them jumping from the helicopter and picking up goose, and I'm like, that looks pretty awesome. Like I want to do that, and kind of set my path and, talked to the recruiter. They tried to get me in to do, whatever job the military had. And I said, no, thanks. I'll go next door and see what the other recruiters are saying. They're like, no, just what do you want to do? And once I told them, they're like, well, that's really hard. And I'm like, well, I'd rather try and fail than not try at all. So had to wait about like 8 months or something before I could go in, but that just gave me lots of time to run around the mountains of Southern Oregon, where I grew up, and get fit and swim in the rivers and, think I was ready until I actually got there and realized you're never ready.
That's wild to me because I've never, because I joined in 2004, I signed the papers, 05 I went in, but like you don't know what you don't know. And so it's just like, sometimes in your mind, you're like, I'm just going to run a lot, or I'm just going to, like, for you, it's just like, I'm going to swim a lot. Like, and you went in the 80s, correct? Or is it like early 90s?
Yeah,
like
yeah, 93.
93. So there's no information other than like going to the library and then trying to find something someone has written.
Yeah, we had the Blue Jacket manual. It was like this thick book, and it had all the rates and everything and a couple pictures. And you just went through that. And, I stared at like an H-3, an older helicopter, and, the SAR swimmer jumping out. I'm like, that looks scary, but awesome. Like, yeah. I want to do that.
That's wild. Well, like I said, even training for, like I said, you swam the rivers, you did, back then like I said, you can't Google or YouTube, how do I become a rescue swimmer? Like this is the way to improve, it's like all those little things that can really excel and help you out. I mean, I feel like I'm part of that generation too. You just kind of like brute force, you hear about some of the, like I said, now they can, you're in high school, you can start training for buds, you can start training for
Mhm.
SF. Like there's companies that like literally replicate exactly what you're going to do. So, nutrition and recovery. But back then I feel like some of us, like I'm probably on the tail end of that, but
Mhm.
some of us just did like brute force, just
Oh
like,
yeah.
I don't know, just run harder and faster
Yeah.
or swim harder and faster. That's all you can do,
Well, it's crazy too because so many of us in that era and before, you feel it later because there's no focus on like nutrition or
Mm-hmm.
muscle, recovery. So, in just the equipment we had, everything. So we're all just we did our job, we brute forced it, but it paid in damage later.
Mm-hmm.
So
What
I
was
think
the attrition rate then for rescue swim? Like, because you have obviously everyone talks about SEALs, but you have like the Navy, you said rescue divers. I mean, that's an animal in itself. So what's the attrition rate for that, or what is that as is that equally as like? Do they go as hard? Do they yell at you as much, or is it just like you either pass fail? Like what was the culture like going into
yeah,
that pipeline?
it was high. I don't know what the exact numbers were, but I mean, there's been classes where there's just it starts with 20 or 30, ends with just a handful. And then there's like my class, we almost all of us made it through. I mean, after 2 week period, most people will roll back, in like a 4 to 5 week course, just because of like the life saving and some of the drills that we're doing. But it was pretty high. When I went in, we had something called the dive motivator, where in boot camp we would wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning and go and work out with candidates for buds, so SEALs, divers, rescue swimmers, SWIC, and EOD. And we'd be holding bricks above our head and doing all that fun stuff. And they'd weed out people at that point, so it kind of gave you a little glimpse. And but at the same point, a lot of people would get through, so you'd have a higher attrition rate. I think they're trying to do better now across all of them, to where don't even waste your time if people aren't going to make it, because physically, if you're in it, if you've already made the end test, physically you can usually get to where you want to go. Mentally, it's a total mental game. They want to see who's going to quit when stuff gets hard. When you're out in the middle of the ocean, you're jumping from a perfectly good helicopter, and there's an F-18 pilot who's face down in the water, or a free floater who is panicked and seeing you as flotation, and now you're hand-to-hand combat. They call it water jiu-jitsu. And you not only have to remain calm, but save that life, someone who's trying to potentially kill you, and not even realizing it because they're in shock, they're panicked, but then safely get them up to the helicopter and then potentially start advanced first aid. And it could be one, it could be a multiple survivor scenario. So I mean, that's why it's so difficult. I mean, every day is harder than the next. They're seeing how far you can go. Shallow water blackout's not an uncommon thing. Let's see how far you'll go. Being blindfolded, being hit by survivors, and having to in my time, take them deep to gain control of them using pressure points and different moves, breaks, holds, releases. And that was just like the life-saving portion. And that was like midday, because the first part of the day, kind of like, buds training, where you're just getting exhausted, sitting in the push-up position for ever, and sit up and running, doing mile swims, everything else. And then you actually get into the technical stuff of saving lives.
Mm-hmm. And how long was that pipeline?
So from start to finish till you're out in the fleet, it's a little less than 2 years, but there's so much that goes into that because you have air crew school, which is your basic survival, where you do the helo dunker and all that fun stuff, land and water survival. Then you go to, if you want to be a rescue swimmer, you go through rescue swimmer school. I think it's 5 weeks now. And then from there you go and do your rating. So like I was anti-submarine warfare. So you go learn about all the, behind closed doors, learn all the secret material of tracking and taking out bad guys. And then you go out, and there's a lot of like acoustic training, but then you get into like the fleet replacement squadron, where you actually start flying in the helicopters and learn all the technology and procedures around the helos, doing jumps and everything else. And then after that one, and SEER school's in there somewhere. So So yeah, it's a long, I mean, just because you get through one doesn't mean you're done. It's like these different phases. You might be able to get repurposed to the military's needs if you fail out at some point, but for the most part, yeah, you just hammer down and you figure out how to survive that day, and then the next day and the next day.
Before we keep going with this podcast, I want to drop this week's discount code for Nine Line Apparel. We're not just a brand, we're a lifestyle that celebrates the spirit of freedom, courage, and American values. Go check out our gear, including hoodies, glassware, flags, jackets, hats, patches, and much more. All material is ethically sourced, so every shirt you buy is free of slave labor. As a veteran-owned and operated company, we also take pride in giving back to those who've served. Your purchase helps us contribute to charitable initiatives supporting veterans and first responders. This episode's discount code is Everest20 for 20% off Nine Line Apparel products. Echo Victor Echo Romeo Echo Sierra Tango 20. Not 10, not 15, 20%. Not 25 because that's a bit excessive. So get over to the store and get yourself 20% off your next purchase. While you're at it, like, listen, and subscribe to the Nine Line Apparel podcast for future discount codes and more conversations with amazing guests like today. Now back to the podcast. That's wild. I mean, that's insane. So then you get to the fleet eventually. Then what's life like then in the Navy as a rescue swimmer in the 90s? We're talking pre-GWAT. What was that life like?
Yeah, it's so I did 2 deployments to the Persian Gulf, part of Operation Southern Watch. So that's 6-month deployments on an aircraft carrier. The helicopter is the first and last aircraft to take off and land. So we're always in the air. We have like a team of 20 rescue swimmers, and we alternate. So we're hoist operators and swimmers. So like you rock, paper, scissors, just who wants to dress out, it's 120 degrees in the Gulf, and who wants to wear a wetsuit today, if you lose that battle. So when flight ops are happening, we're doing starboard D. So just circles on the right side of the carrier waiting for a mishap. Always on alert status. Middle of the night, someone falls overboard or we get launched on, something. Over land, search and rescue, combat search and rescue. So we're all aerial gunners. We're dipping sonar, doing vert rep, PAX transfers. I mean, it's anything the helicopter does, we're doing. So it's like jack of all trades. And things have definitely changed since I've been in, but the day in the life of the 90s, we're just always in the air doing interesting things.
Mm-hmm. So that's more than just, like I said, the rescue swimmer aspect. Like you guys could actually go and search and and search and recovery, or search and rescue essentially.
Yeah,
like you guys
there's always a lot more search than rescue, and a lot of recovery. It could be body recoveries. Things aren't. It's definitely not it's not the Guardian movie. It's not it's not all glorious. There's a lot of trauma. I mean, every flight in a helicopter is traumatic. My first flight in a helicopter, we hit the water, pulled out of it, but it was like, welcome to the fleet. So
really? So how's that? Just like it bottoms and then it.
Yeah. We were doing a practice SAR, search and rescue, and I was the hoist operator. So I was in training, and just a brand new pilot just went too low. Boom, hits the water. It's filling up, and I'm yelling altitude, and the thing is just shaking violently. And we pull out, and we made it out of that one, but it was close, and it definitely etched something in my brain.
Yeah. Especially if it's your first flight. That's a good, like I said, that's a crazy good introduction to hey, welcome to the rescue swimmer life. This thing might actually be going down, like that. And that's wild. So, I mean, is that just, it just fills up and then just the helicopter just managed to pull itself out of the water?
Yeah. We got it. I mean, the water was coming in just because the rotor wash is so hard. As soon as we went down, the wheels were in the water. There's water kind of coming in, and we were able to pull out, and it was pouring out and everything else. But it's tough because any dip in the rotors at that point would have to be a rotor strike, and we'd go down, and helicopters are top heavy. So as soon as they, shred off the main rotors, you flip over and you sink like a rock. Mm-hmm. So we're trained for that. That's the helo dunker. That's, some of the fun training you do in like air crew, and then requalify throughout your time. But we didn't have to do that. we got out, and we never talked about it until now.
Right. So in your time in, then what's been, I guess, your your highest moments, or is there like a few events that stick out to you significantly in your career?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's that holistic team camaraderie. I mean, we're very much professionals at everything we do. We'd party hard, but once we were in that aircraft, we were locked on, and yeah, it's neat to work with such professionals. We had a few different mishaps while I was in, from a low. We not in my squadron, but it's a small community, so we lost quite a few of our brothers, and just some of the even some of the launches. Like I was launched middle of the night because there was a Mexican airliner went down, and we searched. We got our heavy night vision goggles back then, the huge battery pack. We're searching, and you never find anything. So that's disheartening. One of the most interesting, which I talk about, probably the top, just because it's interesting. I was launching the first flight of the morning and got a whistle over the aircraft carrier that there was men in the water. So it was a Iraqi fisher boat had sank like 5 days prior. So they had been out there just holding on to debris. Half the crew had been eaten by sharks, and the other half was just barely alive. I mean, your body's 70% made of water, so if you're in water for that long, you start turning into water essentially, and their skin was separating from their bones. We couldn't hoist them because their whole body would deglove, going up 70 feet into the hoist. So we launched. We had M240s, and just went overwatch while we launched a rib with a surface swimmer. So the boats have rescue swimmers that are surface swimmers. They don't deploy from helicopters, and Marines with shotguns on them. So you don't know if it's good or bad. You're in the Gulf. Just have to assume the worst. And they were able to roll them on without, damaging them. And they were pretty stoked to be alive. I mean, just a traumatic scenario, and just one of those things you don't see on the news. You don't hear stuff like that, but it's just day in the life of, patrolling the Persian Gulf.
Yeah. And so this is all interesting. I've never even heard of that you can deglove. I know this is kind of a random question. How do you recover from that? Is it just to like stay out on the sun deck and dry out essentially, because that's pretty wild to be like,
no, over time, your body it'll get back to normal. It's just like if you prune up, you're in the water, eventually your hands deep prune. Mm-hmm. That's just a severe. Yeah. I don't know if there's any permanent damage, because how deep that it goes. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, that's crazy. They'd be like, oh yeah, if we got to it, they'd deglove in there. It's like, Jesus. All right. Yeah, that's wild. So, how long were you in then? Like, what was your time frame?
I was in from 93 to 99. So I was in 6 years.
Nice. And so in all that, you've deployed to Desert Storm, correct?
It was wedged in between. So Operation Southern Watch. So we would still launch sorties. You're always, doing our thing over there.
Yeah.
We would launch middle of the night and deploy a SEAL team to, I don't know what they're doing because I don't have a need to know, but I knew where I dropped them and where we picked them up.
Nice. So that's cool. So I didn't realize this. So rescue swimmers are on the helicopters that are dropping SEALs on and off of missions and stuff like that, just in case something happens or goes wrong. Yeah. Because I know that just recently they had, I think it was the SEALs tried board, like they lost 2 SEALs recently on a boarding raid or something had happened.
That was off of a rib though. That was in a helicopter boarding.
Yeah.
One fell in, the other went in after, and never leave a man behind. And unfortunately,
that's terrible. So and that's something, like I said, I don't think a lot of people know that there's, even the SEALs have guys looking after them, which is, it's that's pretty cool to know.
Yeah. It's a fun part of the job. We'd, a lot of times, like when a ship is being decommissioned, they're going to sink it, might fast rope some EOD on and, do some training on it before it goes down. And then before a F-18 comes in and takes it out or whatever. Yeah. Scuttle it to the bottom. It's crazy.
So like man overboards, how often did that happen? I mean, to me, that would be freaky. I was never on ship. I was Marines. Luckily never got on a Mew. That was like my nightmare. I was fortunate enough just to do my deployments over in the Iraq and Afghanistan, but I had heard of guys
Fortunate.
going on ship, you know. So it's like I can't imagine it's freaky as hell. So like, how many, you know, how many times did that happen? How often? You know, what's the recovery rate of that? I mean, especially in the middle of the night, like that's got to be hard to find you know, Marine in the middle of the water, you know, that's fallen off a ship.
Yeah. So there's always watch. There's people that are on watch on each side of the ship. So there was a couple man overboards that we had. One walked straight off the front, like 70 feet off the front of the angle deck. They still do like the weather balloons that they'll put up in the air. Well, they did then. I don't know what they do now. But yeah, he walked right off. And fortunately, the watch found or saw him screaming and threw a smoke over and, or actually a flare to mark his spot. They launched the Alert 30 and, you know, our squadron picked him up. And actually, there was a couple, I think one was a day. I just landed and then Joe Pilso took off and picked him up. But yeah, no, I think it's normal. You definitely hear a lot of man overboards. Sometimes it's self-inflicted. People are either trying to commit suicide or they're done. They're out of there. And that can make for a combatant survivor.
Mm-hmm.
And I've definitely heard of that, where as soon as they got, you know, they're fighting you in the water, we're trained for that, get control of them. But once they get up in the cabin, they're still trying to attack you. So you gotta pin them down and zip them up, you know, get them back and then bring them to the brig.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I know, like, you know, if people fall over, they get blown over. You know, they're always pretty grateful to be alive and to be picked up.
Mm-hmm.
Even I was doing like a holy helo, which is where we bring the chaplain on a Sunday out to like the small ships. So some of the smaller ships might be don't have a deck for landing or it's fouled or whatever. So we'll hoist them down, and it's horrible. But we're coming in for a hover on the front of the ship, and there was a crewman down, like a sailor down below, and the rotor wash is it's so ferocious. It knocked the dude down and he was rolling towards the side of the ship, and we're all cheering for him because then we get, you know, something to do. We're going to go get a rescue. It's probably a horrible thing to do, but he went into the side netting and he was fine. So we weren't like trying to like blow him over, but we were okay if he did go over.
I mean, that'd be a shitty day. We're just like, yeah, you know, you're just rolling. All you just want to do is stop, and it blows you off the side of the ship. I mean, that's
yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? Someone else's worst day is our, you know, I don't know, best day or whatever. We're saving that life on someone's worst day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So you did that till 99. What was, you know, reason for getting out? I mean, I imagine that's one enlistment, you know, reason you didn't want to go on, or what was kind of the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I was, I'm never was a lifer by any means. Deploying's tough. I'd met my wife now. Back then we were dating, did one deployment with her, and it was really tough. So I don't know. I always say it was a fun job for my 20s, and got out. Actually, a week before I was supposed to get out, I was supposed to be in for 5 years. I'd signed up for 5. I snapped my ACL on a Navy soccer team. So of all the things that I do, I end up busting myself playing soccer. So I had to extend an extra year. So during that time, I just started, I couldn't jump out of helicopters anymore. So I was working at the Space and Naval Warfare down in San Diego and got into technology. So IT was big at that point, and I ended up finishing my bachelor's, getting my master's, my MBA, and we moved up to the Pacific Northwest. And after we got married and settled in.
I love that. I love the fact that you're like, yeah, I got my master's, my MBA while I was in the Navy. I love other branches stories like Marines. It's my first day in the fleet. Or actually, it was like my first week, and you're supposed to, you know, they take you around all the base like amenities, and
Hmm.
you're going around and you got some admin people, not Marines, they're just like civilians there helping you or whatever. So we walk into one building and she's going down this list of like all these options that we have. This is 2005, or
Hmm.
it's actually just began 2000. This is January of '06. And she's like, "Oh yeah, we can go to school. You guys go to college, Marines here in Hawaii. I was stationed on Hawaii, so they're like, you can do all this. You guys get your associate's degrees. Maybe if you're good, you get bachelor's. Like, it'll be completely paid for. It's none of your GI Bill. You can do this. You can do that. And then she goes, what MOS are you guys? And we were like, oh, because I'm sitting there like, this is great. Like, I'm going to get some homework. Get some
Hmm.
college done. She goes, I go, we're sitting there. There's like four of us. I was like, oh yeah, we're 0311s in infantry. And she goes, oh yeah, forget all about what I just said. Like
Right.
legitimately, like we're the only, because it's a very small like very small peninsula.
Hmm.
But at the time, now they disbanded Third Marine Regiment, and so, but now is 1-3. It was actually mostly like a infantry like duty station. So it's like 11s, do you deploy? You're gonna screw up the whole education system.
Hmm.
Going back and forth, Chris. So they don't even allow it
Oh man.
per our MOS. So I always appreciate, especially when I talk to Air Force is probably the
Oh yeah.
best. It's like they're like, yeah. So I started this business, and I was like, oh, were you reserves? Like, no, I was active duty. So we were like, we started this like multi-million-dollar business, and you know what? I got out because I was making. I was like, Jesus, like really?
I know.
So it
They're
like
like flying a drone out of Vegas in one hand, and then they're like got their business, online
exactly,
business
yeah,
on the
They're
other.
like starting to contract back to their unit, like while they're still. It's like Air
Yeah.
Force. I always say though, that's awesome. I love Air Force. I got nothing against. They're the. I always tell people, I was like, if you want a career, or you want to learn something or get a career, I was like, join the Air Force.
Yeah.
They're super supportive. It's great. It's great. But I like here that even the name, they're like, oh yeah, I got my MBA, and then we took off. I was like, that's great.
Yeah.
Marine Corps is
Were
like,
you in Kaneohe?
yeah, Kaneohe. Yep,
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah, I have
yeah.
family over there in Kailua. So
Oh, really? Okay. Is it your family or your
my
wife's
yeah, my
family?
dad's half. I mean, most of them have passed. It was my grandparents and my
Mhm.
aunt and uncle have moved since. So I just have a cousin there now in Kailua.
Yeah,
But yeah, if you get
Kailua.
over there, it's like a second home.
Yeah. It was great. Like I tell people, like it was awesome being stationed there because Kaneohe has the runway. We have the air wing.
Mhm.
So when we were coming back from Iraq, it was U.S. Airways. I don't know if that's in existence anymore. But U.S. Airways had the contract for some, getting um, uh, getting units back and forth to Iraq from like Kuwait, and so
Mhm.
we were coming back. You'd go from Iraq to Kuwait, and then you would go back to stateside. And so they put our whole unit like our like company, but company plus into like one big plane. And so for my first two deployments and my first one, it was great, and the second one, but you'd fly into Kaneohe. So
Mhm.
we go from the desert, and they would fly in the commercial right into Kaneohe Bay. And we had like, they made it a big thing. They had like a red carpet, would get off the
Wow.
plane. We had the generals putting lays on us, like shaking. It was just, they did a big fanfare and right into the hangar. And then the hangar had your family with the sign. So you'd walk off the hangar with
Oh, wow,
like,
that's
you had
awesome.
a lay on. They really did up, which I think was great,
Yeah, that's really cool.
especially in those years. Because my brother was stationed on the East Coast, and they just got off a bus and they didn't even care. They were like, you're like the 10th unit to deploy. So
Mhm.
they're just like, whatever. They got off the bus, they go meet your family. Like, you don't give a shit.
Yeah.
So it was nice to have a little bit of fanfare when you came back. But yeah, Kailua, that was a fun. We'd go in there. I got my tattoos in Kailua. And I think that's where, what beach is it? Isn't that where, Bellows? Isn't Bellows out that way in Kailua? Or is it past Kailua?
I'm not sure.
Might be past Kailua. Anyways, but yeah, that was awesome. It was great. I always tell people it was awesome. I'm a Minnesota guy, so I need my seasons. So
Mhm.
but I got off my third deployment. I was in Hawaii, stationed there for about 3.5 years. I was like, I gotta get out of here.
Yeah,
Like,
you get the
get me off
island
this rock.
fever. I'm the same. Like people are
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Why did you move from San Diego?" Like, well, I can always go down and visit, but yeah, I'd rather have a home base where you have the seasons.
Mhm.
And where I live, just east of Seattle, it's great place to
Yeah.
raise a family.
Yep.
We've been super pumped to just be here for over 20 years now.
Yeah, same. I mean, I came back. It was funny because people were like, "Oh man, you're leaving Hawaii? That sucks." You're going to miss out. I was like, I can't wait. I got off that plane in that December. We had some of the heaviest snowfall, and I was, happy as a clam, just like in, 14, 15 inches of snow, like just being able to celebrate Christmas, finally out of the Marine Corps and whatnot. And yeah, I'm the same way. I have my family here. We had just yesterday was negative 17 degrees. And then today I open up the door. I'm like, oh, it's a little warmer. It's 23 degrees. Like it was,
That's
it's a
huge.
40 degree swing, but I love it. I love it. I'm like, oh, it's a little warmer out. Not too bad. Still got some snow, and
Yeah.
love my season, love the fall, love all that stuff. But
Yeah.
I agree with you. And Washington State, by the way, is gorgeous. I know you grew up in Oregon, and you're up in the Washington now. But I managed to visit out there 2015. I was National Guard for a few years, and we had one of our annual trainings over at JBLM.
Mhm.
And we at the very end we decided to climb Mount McKinley or I think it's McKinley, right? Or
Rainier.
Mount Rainier on a hangover. We obviously didn't get super far, but it was like,
Nope.
and I was like, this is awesome, and so we kept climbing, and it was one of the warmest seasons you guys had. It was summer of 2015. And so it was like the snow shelf was like way higher. So you could just keep going. And I wanted to go to the base camp before the summit. Yeah. But the guys I was with they were way too hungover, and I was like, oh, okay, all right. But it was really cool. It was gorgeous. I have pictures of it. Like, I was like, dude, Washington State's the best. Like, this is fucking great. And then we got into the van, and my legs cramped up so bad, from being hungover, and then literally climbing halfway up the mountain. I was just like, it was the most painful. Like, I was like, laying, it was like with a jumper van, so at least we had like a whole row to ourselves. I was like just dying on the way back, but I know, yeah. So that's awesome. So you go into IT, get your MBA, get out, move back to Washington State, correct? Is that you ended up? And then, so what evolves you into mountaineering and eventually climbing that summit?
Yeah, I think there was a adventure gap occurring. One day I'm jumping out of helicopters, the next I'm like heads down. I don't know. I think it's common for people that come from the military and then they go to civilian life, and it's like, oh my gosh, you're ready to jump on a grenade for someone, and now it's like behind a desk, and it was a contrast. So I started hiking because we have the Cascades here, all these beautiful mountains, and just take it up a notch. I decided to climb the highest peaks on the 7 continents just to have a larger goal, and Everest obviously being one of those. So that's what got me into it. So once you have a goal, a lot of times now you have something to work towards. And, it's something that's not, sometimes it appears unattainable at first until you get closer to that problem. It's like being in the Marines, right? It's like when you look at it before you're in, it's like, man, that's crazy. Like all these different things, the movies, everything that's kind of been in your life, leading up to that point. But once you're actually there and you're being trained and you're closer to it, it's like you're very capable. Like these people that do it are very, very capable of doing it. And that's the same with mountaineering.
Yeah. And I agree with you with that, because I've done a bunch of stuff in life that it's surreal when you're doing it, but then because it's such a big thing in your head. Like I agree with you. But when you take that first step, and sometimes it's mundane stuff. I don't even say mundane, but like when I joined the Marine Corps, I remember I was the after Black Friday, like we were in the squad bay, and like I had that surreal moment of like, I'm doing it, because you're a kid and you're like, oh my God, it's the Marines. Like that's impossible. That's the boot camp. That's where I'm in the military. I've just signed a 4-year contract. Like all that's like looming, and not everybody does that. A very few amount of people do that in the US. And so I remember, and it's just like one step at a time, but you're doing it.
Yep.
And it was like standing in the squad bay. I'm like, oh my God, here I am. Like I'm becoming a Marine, and, I still got a lot of pain left. There was like, another 3 months left in boot camp, and, yeah, so it's all it takes is that one step, or even other stuff that I've done as well. And I agree with you. I think, even contracting, I know it sounds, again, not a weird thing. People are like, oh yeah, of course you contract. It's like, well, back in the day, people just didn't know how to do it, or they didn't know people that did it. So therefore they weren't doing it. So I remember searching for jobs and getting my first contract, to go work with Blackwater or whatever. And guys would email like, oh my God, how did you do it? I'm like, dude, I just emailed, I emailed, and then they were like, sometimes you think things are way more complicated, but it's usually someone just saying an email like, yeah, here's the date, we'll pay for your plane ticket here, then you're gone, and like, you do it, but it's always that big mental hurdle, that very first step. So,
Well, we get in
you know,
our own way. So
yeah,
in
yeah,
that scenario, it's totally like you put these barriers in front of you that are unnecessary. Okay,
exactly.
even if those barriers are there, figure out how to get around them. If not, again, try and fail. It's better than not trying at all.
Exactly, exactly. And I think people maybe I don't know, maybe in the US it's like they'd rather not try and not fail because it's like, oh my God, I'm a failure. It's like, well, you never tried at all. So it's better to
Yeah.
fail than never. Again, I agree with you, never try at all. And so you started hiking and stuff, like, so how does that evolve? I mean, that's insane. I mean, like, I've heard of the seven peaks, I've heard of all that stuff. And I watched God, what was it? It was the documentary on the Sherpa. He was former like SAS. He
Mm-hmm.
climbed all seven in
Wednesday.
like, yeah, yeah, in like some crazy record-setting amount of time or something like that. Um, so I've definitely heard of that. So, I mean, logistically, training-wise, how do you wrap your head around it to go, okay, I'm going to do this? I'm sure a lot of people around you are like, you're insane, or why would you do that? That's crazy. What's that first step that you go, I am doing this, I'm setting the goal. Now I need to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, the first step is convincing my wife that I can do this.
As is everything. Yeah, I know how
Otherwise,
that
it's a
is too.
non-starter.
Yeah, yeah, right.
But she's a counselor, and which is perfect because I clearly
Yeah.
need help. But she's always respected. She met me when I was doing my thing in the military. She knows I'm wired differently,
Mhm.
and I take calculated risks. I'm not some crazy daredevil that's just going to go do things and get myself killed. There's always things outside of your control, but just first, yeah, it's just kind of like creating that plan. It's a multi-year plan, understanding what it takes to do all seven, because there's a lot. It's the northern southern hemisphere. There's different times of year you can do certain things, and then there's the financial piece, and then the technical side of it. So getting training, doing Rainier, being able to guide on Rainier, um, going up to Denali, climbed Denali 3 times, snowboarded it once, um, up in Alaska, and I've actually still never summited it, and that's part of my story. Like it was my first go in 2009. Got within 1,000 feet, and there's 60-mile-an-hour winds. We had been pinned down for a week at 17,000 feet. It was so cold you could see your breath freezing around your sleeping bag. It was just brutal. We're just losing weight. We made one attempt, like I said, got within 1,000 feet, and it was a good day to live. We turned around. One guy on another team got launched off the top. We were searching for him. They still haven't found him to this day. Like, they had the C-130s with their infrared, just flying around trying to find a heat signature, but still haven't found him. So you got to make those decisions. It's tough because then you got like 15 miles, 70 pounds in a pack, another 60 in a sled, getting out of there. But the mountain's always going to be there, and I'm 0 for 3 on that one, and I'm okay with that, because again, it is a mountain. I'm not going to kill myself doing it over and over, and I've had enough experiences. If I end up there again, great. But I tried to package all this together while my kids were young, and now I'm on the other end of that, 18 and 21. So if I wanted to, I could go after it again. But I don't know. There's so many other things to do in life, and I've seen a lot of that mountain, more than most people have. So yeah, tons of planning.
Yeah, and so then I guess I won't say financial, but how do you do that financially? I mean, after this, we can talk about my little some stuff when I've researched Everest myself quite extensively here for a client about a year or two ago. How, like, said, financially, do you build up on that? Do you get sponsors? Everest, I know, can range from, like, just in generalities, and I don't know, it's like 20,000 or 10 to 20,000 in general, getting there, getting the permit, and that's if you're like solo, which I know you went up solo. So how, what's the battles of that? Because you're like, I'm ready to go, but then it's like,
Mm-hmm.
do you just pull a bunch of credit cards? Do you get North Face? You get some sort of foundations? Like, what was kind of that journey then to get to the summit of Everest.
Yeah, yeah, it's everything. Because even Antarctica, climbing down there, it's super expensive because
Yeah,
it's,
because that's super secluded. So it's like just to get to Antarctica is like,
yep, and the
you know,
permits and everything else. So those are the high costs. Yeah, I was solo, so I wasn't paying $100,000 to go stand on top of a mountain. I was taking the cheapest route, just nickel and diamond. Living in the Pacific Northwest, it's either here or Colorado is like the majority of the climbers, just due to the mountains all nearby. So it's a small community. So met someone who was a guide. He was going to my same church, and we kind of partnered together. We went in with a major company that's a Western guided company over there, so sharing their Sherpa resources. But yeah, it's still, even with that, it's money, right? So it's for every 1,000 times I begged for a sponsorship, I might get one, and it might be just a fraction. I did work at Cisco Systems, which was one of the biggest technology companies in the world. So I was showcasing their technologies up there. So then they worked with a couple other companies and got me some money. And but yeah, some was my own, some was just me out begging for money. I had sponsorships on clothing and all the gear, which can be really expensive. Once you have it, you have it. But
Mhm.
it's, full down suit can be, I don't know what it is now, but it was like at least $1,000 back then.
Yeah, because I mean, like even some of the camping gear, some of the guys that I knew really just into camping gear. Going to REI. I remember, just me dropping $300-400 on a Osprey backpack. Let alone,
Mhm.
like you said, the down stuff, getting everything you need, like the everything is specialized. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. The boots, everything. It's,
yeah, you're not just
you'll
taking
lose
a walk.
digits if you don't have the good stuff. It's crazy. You think about the people back in the 50s and 60s, 70s, 80s climbing, and just the wool, gloves and everything else. And you climbed, but you knew you were going to probably lose at least 9 of your 10 fingers or so. It was just like
Yeah.
nuts back then.
Yeah, that's insane. So what is that? Yeah, what's that journey then? Finally, like you said, you're doing it. You've got to Everest Base Camp. You know those challenges. What's that journey like then?
Yeah,
Heading up to the summit.
it's wild because at that point, this would have been my fourth of the 7 summits. So I did Denali, Kilimanjaro, Mount Elbrus, the highest peak in Europe, which is in Russia, like super dangerous area, and and then Everest. So it's surreal. It's a crazy experience. When you're actually doing it. It's kind of like you when you're in basic, right? It's like, I'm here, I'm doing it. You got to get out of your own head,
Mhm.
because just to get to base camp, which is at 17,500 feet, Rainier, what you tried to go up was 14,500. So base camp is 3,000 feet higher than our highest peak in the lower 48, but it's 38 miles on foot. So just, it takes a long time. You can't survive long up in the death zone. Anything above 8,000 meters or 26,000 feet, there's only a third of the air, third of the ozone up there. So, if you pluck your body from where you're at in Minnesota and put you on the summit, you just pass out and die. So you have to acclimate. So you climb high, go back down, sleep low. Your body will produce more red blood cells, which carry oxygen. So then you can survive a little bit higher. But it's a 2-month expedition. And most of that 2 months is acclimating so that you can survive to be in a position to actually go for the summit, which there's only a couple days out of the year because it's wedged within monsoon season that you can actually climb to the summit. So then you've seen on the news like a line of climbers going up. Well, there's only one way up, one way down. So, that's not unusual. And compared to other mountains around the world, there's not that many people doing it. It's just, Everest gets all the hype, all the bad press. My scenario was totally different. I never had lines because I was soloing.
Mhm. And what year was that? Before, like, is that before the like the lines, like the photo that came out? I think it was
Oh
like
yeah,
a
yeah,
few years
yeah.
back.
I climbed in 2011.
Okay. And so how was it back then? I mean, like I said, just technology wise, compared to like 2025. I mean, that's a 14-year difference.
Yeah, yeah. I wasn't Snapchatting or TikToking on the top. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we barely had. I guess we had Facebook back then, and I didn't have a satellite phone. Something went wrong, so I wasn't able to get one. And that's always key. That was kind of my wife's like one thing, like, okay, you can do it, but you got to bring a sat phone. I don't have a sat phone. So, because I've called her from the summit from all the other peaks, which is always cool. But yeah, we had line of sight 3G, like a cell phone cell service. Line of sight being I had to hike a mile out of base camp, climb this rock, this big boulder, point my laptop or my phone towards it to like have a conversation. And I would do like some, I guess it was probably like live WebExes with sponsors and stuff. I did a couple of those. It'd be avalanches kicking off behind me and everything. It's just, you're immersed in the highest peaks in the world. It's surreal.
Yeah. I've watched the documentaries and it's like amazing to see that. And the temperature too. I mean, I've seen, it's like you think you're bundled up the whole way, but I mean, I'll say this kind of sounds dumb, but you're like closer to the sun, like it does kind of keep warm to some extent while you guys are making your way up to the, like camp 2 or 3, or, as you're progressing your way.
Mm-hmm.
But when does it start getting to the point, like if people were doing it, where's the biggest hang up? Like going from, I think it was camp 2 to 3 or something like that, where it starts getting technical. I mean, it's all technical, but shit starts getting real.
Yeah. It's so right out of base camp is the Khumbu Icefall. So that's the most technical from an obstacle perspective, because it's seracs, which are building sized blocks of ice that are continually falling. That's where you see a lot of the ladders, those cheap aluminum ladders that are tied together. And you're climbing through the night because when the sun comes up, everything becomes unstable. All the fixed lines, which are ropes attached to anchor points, are usually attached to like pickets or ice screws, which once the sun comes out, those can loosen up. So yeah, I'm headlamping going through the night. But yeah, it's like you had said, like in the Western Coombe, so above Camp 1, it's kind of this valley. There's one section where there's 5 ladders tied together in this like bottomless crevasse. It's pretty crazy. But if the sun is out and there's no wind, I mean, it can go from like negatives to 80 degrees because that sun is banking off the ice. And it's really important to manage your body temperature because as fast as it got hot, the cloud cover comes in and now you're frozen. So you can go instant hypothermia. So it's like all these things you're thinking about, not moving too fast to where you're like your body temp is just raised and you're overheating. So, unzipping certain flaps to get some airflow in, hydrating, eating as much as you can. You feel like ass as you're getting higher. You're just not hungry and you're just losing weight, but you got to push through that. So there's nothing glamorous about mountaineering. I'll tell you that much.
So then you said you went up solo then and you had the summit to yourself. Like, how did you manage to get, I wouldn't say like, how did you manage to get or to do that, but like, was there circumstances that got you to that point that's like, did someone have to bail or did you, you went up again, it's cool that you did in 2011 before like the lines, to be able to go up and you're the only one up there, how did that happen? And then, what was that experience like?
Yeah, there still would have been not the lines you've probably seen in the news, those pictures, but there's only one way up, one way down. I just happened to be I wasn't planning to solo. I was planning to go independent, which meant my friend Pasang Sherpa, who's locally lives over there, amazing guy, had 2 summits already. So we would be climbing together. So we were in a position just a day ahead of when people were really going to go for the summit. So we were attempting on May 15th. So we were up Lhotse face. So like you mentioned earlier, one technical section. So out of Camp 2, which is advanced base camp, which is at 21,000 feet, you start climbing the 4th highest mountain in the world, which is Lhotse face. You climb this straight up ice and rock and snow wall for a couple miles. You actually anchor off halfway up that, which is Camp 3 at 23,000 feet, and rest there and then continue up. And that's actually where you start using supplemental oxygen. Another rule my wife said. And basically it's it's supplemental, so it mixes with the outside air. Because if you were 100% compressed, scuba, once you came off that, you would die.
Yeah.
So it's an extra 15 pounds, and it's just slowly, slowly moving up this mountain, Lhotse face. Get up to the highest camp in the world, South Col. Just kind of rest. You got to keep moving. You don't rest for long. You check the weather. It was 70-mile-an-hour winds the day we were heading up. So one Japanese climber died on the south summit. Most everyone else had to turn back. So on the way up, that's where I had we'll call it a goggle malfunction. And that's key to the story. So I'm heading up. It's probably around 24,000 feet, just on a wall of ice. I stop to get a drink of water. I take my mask off, oxygen mask, my goggles, I wrap them around my arm, and then my foot slips out. And my goggles they fell off my arm, and they slid. And typically you don't have extra gear. You can only carry what you can carry. Usually I just wear sunglasses, but with an oxygen mask, it just wouldn't fit. So my goggles are gone. And I'm just looking down going, what the heck? It's too dangerous to not have some sort of protection. You get snow blindness. But some Sherpa about 500 feet below were waving at me. They had, a miracle. They stopped the goggles. And I came off oxygen, everything. I anchored all my gear. I rappelled down, got to where the goggles were, and they tied them off to a rope, and they went to like a higher Camp 3. And they were cracked in the middle. So goggles have 2 layers. The internal layer was cracked. So what could I do? I put them on. I start climbing back up, and being in the cold, whenever you ski or anything, your goggles will freeze. They'll fog up and freeze because of the contrast of the cold air and your hot breath. Well, mine was freezing between layers. So I just kept moving. I couldn't see really good. I took some gnarly video of that, and then got up to my gear, and eventually I ripped out that internal lens, not really realizing that cut their effectiveness in half. Eventually got up to high camp, found Pasong. He was resting in a tent. We made the radio call. The weather was calming down. They said it was going to be super calm and 50-mile-an-hour gusts the following day, like later in the day. So that's pretty typical. Climb through the night, hit the summit on sunrise, get back down safely, and then the next day try to get down, or even try to go all the way down to Camp 2 that same day, because it's all gravity at that point. But yeah, at that point, we were the only 2 people going for the summit from the Tibet side or Nepalese side, which is very unusual, just because everyone else was, going to be going up the next day. But we felt safe, we felt comfortable, and yeah, we went up. The sun set, so I took that last picture, and just all through the night, we started moving up. Got to about the balcony, 27,500 feet, and I had been inching away from Pasong, which was concerning. So I waited up at this area called the balcony for about an hour, and he finally showed up, and he threw up, and he's like, "I'm not feeling good." So I figured at that point we needed to go down. So we had a conversation, and he's like, no, we'll continue up. And, it's these decisions, you live and die by. And my rule is, if I'm not there, I'm not going to question it, because I have been there, not just here, but in the military, everything else. Like, you have the amount of information that is within your 3-foot reach. Mm-hmm. And those are the decisions that you go by. And he said he was good. We continued up. And then at about 28,000 feet, it was getting more technical. That's where he said he needs to go back to the balcony and just wait. So at that point, I weighed out, how was the weather? Weather was good. How was I? I felt strong. But most importantly, how was my friend? How was Pasong? And he assured me he was good. He was going to wait right there. He's like, if the summit's that way, it's fixed lines. So I'm attached to a rope. So I'm just inching my way up with the Jumar, this device that has backwards teeth that digs into the rope to attach to my harness. So that makes it, relatively safe. If I fall, I don't fall that far. So he went down, I went up. We never looked back. He had stashed another oxygen bottle there for my way down. And just continued up. So that was the decision point.
That's wild. And so then somebody that, you know what I mean? Like, what's that feeling like when you get to, like, what's the last step to, I'm on Everest. This is it.
Yeah, it's crazy because even then the sun was rising as I was heading up the South Rock Step, which is a rock climb, with crampons, the spikes on my boots, and just the technical side of it. At sea level it would be nothing, but up there in the death zone, it's tough. It's like every move takes about 5 seconds because your body is just slowly dying. Get up to the south summit and you drop down and then come up on a 40-foot rock climb called Hillary Step. And then above that, there's a section called the Cornice Traverse, which is a 2-mile drop on each side of you, left into Nepal, right into Tibet. And it's like a 2-foot wide path. So winds were starting at this point, but nothing spectacular. But yeah, that's the first time where you can actually see the true summit. So just a mess of prayer flags and just, it's a size of a table, like a dining table. But it's still, I can see it. It's still going to take me like a half hour to get there because it's so slow. But yeah, it's emotional. It's tough, and it's tough to be emotional in the death zone because everything takes your breath, your energy away, and just kept moving, and just it's a lot to process. And even today I still process it. I have pictures and I'll just go back to that. And it's one thing to share it with someone, but to be one of 2 people in the Himalayan database to ever have the summit to myself on a given day is just, it's unreal.
Yeah.
So I got there super emotional, and just really just tried to calm whatever was happening in my body, and I wanted to share it. So I took my radio out and I called down and just said, "This is Brian checking in from the summit of Everest." And just like all the different camps, it's a small community, came to life and just so excited for me, and just, make sure you're safe, coming down. And at that point, a friend I had that was a day behind, just told me, just, be careful. And you and Pasong, give me a call once you get down past the South Summit. And it was at that moment I realized no one knew I was alone. So I'm like, well, that's cool, but Pasong went down over an hour ago. And he's like, "You're alone?" He's like, "Oh my gosh, be careful."
Yeah.
Like, I'll do that. But I talked to him later. He turned to Lakba Sherpa, who he was climbing with, who had 5 summits, super strong guy, had been climbing with him for about a month. And he asked, how long is it going to take Brian to get down to high camp? He says, "Oh, Brian, it'll take him 2-3 hours." And no one would hear from me for 7.
Was that just because took so long to get back down from the summit then, or did you run into some issues?
I ran into some issues. So I took the highest selfie in the world, put my radio down
Yeah.
and got a snack, got some water, and you can't spend much time up there. So I started moving down, and about 10 feet into my descent, everything just went completely white, and I went snowblind. So snow blindness is the sunburning of the cornea, and it takes about 24 hours to return normally. And I wouldn't regain my eyesight for about a month and a half.
Jesus.
So I'm up there, and I remember, like, military training, you assess the situation. I dropped down, grabbed the rope I was attached to, and just realized I'm at the highest point in the world. I'm completely alone. I'm blind. No one's coming to get me. And without overthinking it, I stood up and I started moving, just slowly moving, holding onto that rope, using my other senses, but trying so hard to use my eyes.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm not normally blind. So I would grab the rope and like try so hard. And it's so painful. It's like breaking potato chips in your eyelids. You just realize how often your eyes flutter. And it's bright white. It's not blind black. It's like right in front of a light bulb. You can't see anything. You can move your finger in front of a light bulb and you'll know something just moved, but it's impossible to focus on anything. So I kept moving down. And this whole time I felt this presence around me.
Mhm.
I don't know. It's just this peaceful presence. I didn't overthink it. I just kept moving. But it's like if you and I are in a room together and you close your eyes, I don't say anything, but you know I'm there.
Yeah.
It's this, I don't know, it's this tangible presence. So the first major obstacle was that Cornice Traverse at the 2 mile drop on each side. And I could hear the 50-mile-an-hour gusts kicking up over the ridge. And it was just taking me so long. I would hear that. I would hunker down, lower my mass, my center of mass. That wind would kind of knock me off balance. And then I'd stand up, take another step. And it was just kind of like that as I went across this traverse. Got to the top of Hillary Step and reversed my gear, rappelled down and just kind of like slipped out, pendulumed, hit the side of the rock and just slid down. I remember laying at the base of it, doing this assessment. Am I broken? Just kind of feeling around like, nope, I'm good. And just being grateful for that. And again, just the next thing is the South Summit. So humiliating because you have to actually climb back up the South Summit, which it's better to fall up than down. So I guess
Mhm.
there's a little safety there, but got to the top of it and just slipped out head over heels. The snow was soft. I'd lost a crampon and just, it's the most uncontrollable feeling. It was probably the scariest thing I've ever had. It's be like, go to your roof, close your eyes and jump.
Yeah.
And just falling. I would have fallen for over a mile, but the rope I was attached to shock loaded and the anchors held. And I remember just being upside down and my heart is just racing through my chest and I'm doing everything to right myself. And, my mask is ripped from my face. My bottle of oxygen's coming out of my pack and just righted myself, and got my breathing back down and just got my calm and started side traversing over and found my goggle. I mean, it's a miracle, or I'm sorry, found my crampon that had came off. That's a total miracle because I don't know if I could have got down without it. And I torqued those down on my boots and side traversed over, and a slab avalanche just kicked off. It's warm. It's very common where a slab of the snow, the surface layer at this, intense angle that I was in just kicked off. And I remember right away, I grabbed the rope that I was attached to and it burned right through my glove. That's how fast it was going. I
Mhm.
remember the feeling of that pain and just, kind of calling out, but just grabbing it, stop myself, and was able to side traverse over to the rock, get down, and that's where I almost walked right past that oxygen bottle that Pasong had put, and I knew I'd be running out soon. And laid down next to it, fumbled around with the regulator, and was able to get it on, but it wouldn't work. So I don't know today this day if it's frozen or whatever. It wouldn't work, and I troubleshot for a few seconds, and I didn't have all day, so I put my other one back on, and then I put that extra 15 pounds in my pack. Still don't know why to this day I did that, but just kept moving. Got to the balcony. Pasong wasn't there, so I assumed he went went down. And um, at that point, I remember I was pretty like happy because I'd made it this far. The last 20 sections was or 20 obstacles were like just rappelling. So 20 points of rappelling, having to come in and out of these anchors. And I started heading down, and about, I don't know, 20 feet into it, my mask just starts collapsing around my face. So typically if you come off oxygen, you're up in the death zone. It's game over. And I remember at this point, I'd been climbing for about 33 hours from the day prior to this point, completely blind. And I surrendered at that moment. I dropped to my knees and I prayed. It's God, I can't do this alone. Please help. And in that moment, I witnessed a miracle. Around the world at that same time, I found out later, like my wife was stirred awake and just felt something and she prayed. People I didn't even know that reached out later knew I was climbing, following me on the climbing magazine blog and stuff, reached out, said I knew something was up and I needed to pray for you. So it was a super powerful moment. But yeah, when I just surrendered at that moment, I felt this energy come over me. Felt like I was like lifted up first thing I did, not overthink it, just tried that other oxygen bottle, and I got a positive flow. And it was one of the most painful things, taking like 5 deep breaths. It was like fire re-entering my body. It was like tangibly painful. But again, just put my gear back to how it needed to be and started rappelling down as fast as I could, which is still very slow. Didn't want to trip over myself. Eventually got to the edge of high camp, about a quarter mile. And out of nowhere, Pasang just hugs me. He had walked out that quarter mile. He's like, "Brian, you alive?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "I'm so sorry I leave you." I'm like, "That's okay, dude. Just don't worry about it." And help me back and
Yeah, yeah.
tripping over rocks. It's wouldn't regain my eyesight for about a month and a half fully, and collapsed in the sleeping bag. I threw him my camera. He's like checking the summit photos and everything, asking me, how long did it take you to get there and all this stuff. And but I passed out for like 15 hours. I'd lost 20 pounds, had black eyes, but I was alive, and my eyes were just like cemented shut just from secretion. But yeah, I still had to get down. So the next day, it takes 2 days to get back down to base camp, and then that 38 miles out, going across the ladders, down Lhotse face through the ice fall. But I had Pasang with me and had some help. So yeah, it's very blessed to be here.
That's an incredible story. That's insane. So, I mean, you do that. So I imagine the rest of the seven, or we got 3 left. They're probably not as crazy, or you feel like, yeah, I did that. That was,
Yeah, it's one of
after.
those things, man. When
Yeah.
it's tough from a trauma perspective. You deal with lots of trauma in the military, and then you end up chasing trauma like unconsciously. So now leave that and I go to this, and I'm just layering it on, and that coupled with childhood trauma. So it was tough because I got back. Everyone loves a survival story. So I had, Fox News and everyone here, and bright lights. I still can't see. I look just horrible. I'm just like, I'm already scrawny, but I was like super scrawny. But I hadn't even began to deal with what I had went through. And then I'm on stage telling these stories and just weeping and trying to hide it from my kids. And, as people, good friends I had, everything else, it was weird. It's like I had a disease or something. They don't know how to react. And I'm sure I was projecting that as well. So it took a lot of time. It's taking a lot of time for the healing of it. But yeah, the best thing for me, honestly, was getting back in the mountains. And I wasn't sure if that would be the case, but once my eyesight came back and I was able to get out there, be immersed in that, that nature therapy, that's exactly what I needed.
Mm-hmm. And so then, yeah, like I said, what was life like after that then? Like, so you're starting to get a little bit better, you're on Fox News. I mean, you wrote a book, what has life been like since 2011, coming into 2025?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's interesting because I'm more of I don't know, call me a shy extrovert. If I get to know you, like I'll hang out and be whatever, but I'm relatively shy. This made me just get further into my shell. And because of this, I was on Anderson Cooper and, just all kinds of media, and, it's been a few reenactments. They're actually making a movie. We got funding for development. They're actually making a movie of blind descent. But they wanted to early on, and it was too much. It's too heavy. So I'm like, I'll write a book, and I was able to do that and get published by Tyndale House in 2014 or 2015, and then I just wrote another book, Calm in the Chaos, because everyone, when I give talks, I do motivational talks, they always ask, how didn't I panic up there? And my job in the military is to never panic. We are literally jumping out of a helicopter to rescue someone who's panicking, and we have to maintain control of that. So I wrote Calm in the Chaos, interviewing 30 different people from beginning of time, the Apollo 13 pickup, to Vietnam, to some of my own stuff, and just capturing those stories, but abstracting what is different about us to where we can remain calm in this chaotic situations and thrive. And then that led into the podcast, same name, Calm in the Chaos. But yeah, just it's been a whirlwind for sure. Like you see your trajectory in life, your purpose, and then one day you're trying to climb a little mountain and you survive something that no one's ever survived, and life just pivots, and you pivot with it or you crawl into a shell. So I think I tried to do both, and it's very humbling because something like that you get a lot of survivor's guilt, because there are 300 plus bodies on the mountain. Like, why am I alive?
Mm-hmm.
Why are they there? And for me, it really just came down to faith and focus. Focus is funny because ironic, I guess, because I couldn't see anything, but I
Yeah.
knew what I needed to do to survive. I had to take one more step forward. There was probably 100% chance I was going to die, but if I start thinking about that, I'm going to be a permanent fixture on the mountain. So I had to figure out a reason to keep moving. And then faith, I had that presence around me, and I tried so hard to do it on my own. I reached a point, and I've never given credit or had a tangible miracle like that, but I can't explain it any other way, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
just so grateful.
That's awesome. That's amazing. So right now you're doing motivational speaking, Calm the Chaos, the podcast. Is that something you kind of do full time now? Is that what,
Yeah.
your full time gig?
Yeah, right now it is. Got a lot of speaking gigs. I mean, we're flying off to Paris and Amsterdam in a week to do a talk, and then yeah, just got back from the USS Iowa and USS Midway, where I did the same. That was a cool venue, both the museums now, the battleship and aircraft carrier. So lots of interesting things. So it's cool to just have these conversations and just to be able. Everyone's, I hate the thing. Everyone's climbing their own Everest, but everyone is struggling in their own way. I'm never going to
Mm-hmm.
come in and be like, don't ever get blind. Your Everest is my Everest. Like, don't go blind on the summit of Everest and survive that. That's just
Yeah.
silly. And I'm not going to connect, but everyone is dealing with somebody. And
Mm-hmm.
if I can get down to that level and have that conversation, it can be very, very powerful. And that's what I've been able to do. But even my own scenario is still so surreal, and it's difficult, even what are we, 14 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Even given my talks, there's certain parts of my talk I have to just either pause or avoid because it's emotional, it's tough.
Yeah. No, I understand. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is awesome. I mean, where can people find you? Where, your books, we looking out for a film, where can they find you on socials? This was an amazing episode. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm on every flavor of social, Brian C. Dickinson, but you can just Google me, Brian Dickinson, or briandickinson.net. And my books are sold where books are sold.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is great.